Those who have been to a ruined wedding, what happened? I was studying photography and used to act as an assistant to a well-known wedding photographer. Went to a couple's wedding. He shot digital and I shot black and white film. Spent all day with the couple from 9 a.m. through till 2 a.m. the next morning when we left. I could see how genuinely in love they were. It was only a day but I got to know them quite well and really liked them both. The next morning, I get a call from the photographer and his voice was shaky. He explained that the groom had been murdered that night after the reception party. 3 guys had broken into their bungalow to steal wedding gifts. The groom got out of bed to stop them and they executed him in front of the bride. I was in shock for about 2 weeks. This story was in South Africa, if that helps explain how or why this happened. The next weekend, the photographer and I went to the bride's house to present her with the photos. We'd worked together to get the job massively accelerated so she had the photos of her husband. We did it at our own expense and didn't charge her a penny for the day or all the prints and album. Sort of the least we could do. Because my photos didn't matter as much, I'd been able to simply capture those natural moments between them, rather than staged wedding photos. So they had the normal album pics but also about 150 snaps of just them being a couple. She was in tears from the moment we arrived till we left a few hours later. She was a shadow of the women I'd met only a week earlier. That shit still haunts me. The groom's father groped both the bride and his daughter, my then girlfriend, multiple times each. Ended up getting punched out by his son, and locked in a minivan for a few hours until he sobered up. Edit. Half the questions are the same, and the answer is yes, he groped his own daughter, as well as his son's wife. This was one I worked at. After the ceremony, right at the start of the reception, photographer was taking jumping photos of the bride and bridesmaids, so they were all jumping in the air while wearing heels. Bride landed and dislocated her knee, then passed out and kept going in and out of consciousness. We called an ambulance who turned up and fixed her knee etc., but she wanted to continue with the wedding. She then had the first course of the meal and threw up down her dress, and had to sit with her mom in another room while everyone else danced etc. Felt so bad for her as she spent the rest of the evening crying. Attended a wedding reception and was seated near the cameraman. An aunt of mine was sitting closer to the camera and spent the evening commenting and gossiping about everyone, and much of it came out on the video. The cameraman was great. He did 2 copies, one edited and the other no holds barred. The unedited version is the stuff of legend. It was a big wedding, over 300 people. Turns out the bride had been having an affair with her cousin's husband. The cousin had known for a little bit, but waited until the wedding to go table to table letting everyone know the bride was sleeping with her husband. Poor groom was blindsided. Worst part was his father-in-law was well off and opened up a restaurant for him. Well, he lost his wife and his restaurant. Maybe not ruined but it definitely got tense. Started with the best man/groom's brother just absolutely roasting the bride and her parents. Basically called them gold diggers and stuff in front of several hundred family and friends. Then they cut the cake. Apparently, the groom was told under no uncertain terms not to shove cake in her face. Well, he did it anyway and she stormed off, not to be seen for 20 minutes. Reception went on as planned. She got wasted and I'm told she passed out that night in the middle of the street while still in her wedding dress. Pure class. They're divorced now. I went to a wedding where the bride and groom bought the wedding package on Groupon, which is fine. Why spend a fortune for one day? But I guess the venue thought they could cut some corners. So they stuck us in a room that smelled so strongly of cat urine some people immediately left. The only drinks were those from a vending machine. It was next to an airport so every time a plane took off the ceremony had to be paused because you couldn't hear anything. And the day after the event, every single one of us had food poisoning. Edit. Bonus story because even though it didn't ruin the wedding for the couple, it ruined it for the bridal party. I was a bridesmaid for my friend. Flew across the world for over 10 hours to be there. Had to do the setup of the venue, assign people to rooms, put signs on doors, finish the seating chart, transport food, redo her bouquet because she didn't like it, etc., etc. The whole time she's rude and tells everyone within earshot that the bridesmaids aren't helping. Her maid of honor was absolutely bending over backwards trying to keep her happy and instead of being grateful she instead told her sister I should have asked you to be my maid of honor instead. She was pretty cold to me and kept asking if I'd lost weight. I said yes because I had been ill but didn't think much of it. At the reception her new husband takes the opportunity to read the speech she clearly wrote for him to say to me we are so glad you fit into your dress. In front of over 100 people. I don't speak to her anymore and neither does her maid of honor or other bridesmaid. The bride's father was 45 minutes late to walk his daughter down the aisle. While we were waiting the air conditioning broke in the venue. It was over 100 degrees outside and humid AF. The place was overcrowded. You could barely move without bumping into someone else and in the heat that was extra miserable. I guess the air conditioning problem had also affected the refrigeration or something because most of the food was spoiled. The only food on the buffet was salad, spaghetti and rolls. Not enough to feed even half the guests. Most people left after the first dance. Two of the bride's aunts fainted. The bride and the wedding planner were crying. I was invited to the reception of one of my good friends. They had been courthouse married for months and living happily. When I arrived at the location and saw the big crowd, I knew something was wrong. Friend's wife is prone to panic attacks and is extremely agoraphobic to the point of breaking down and crying if she is overwhelmed. Immediately call friend and ask what's going on and if this was okay. Turns out friend's parents invited everyone possible to be there without my friend knowing. After I sent him a picture of the crowd, him and his wife thought it would be better to go on a second honeymoon than have a reception. He sent a message apologizing to all those his wife and him invited and telling them to leave without telling his parents. Parents had a meltdown as we left. This was around 2009. On the second day of the wedding, the bride went swimming in the ocean. It took place in Tenerife. She swam out too far and was basically lost at sea for 9 hours or so. She eventually found her way back but was in bad shape. Everyone was panicked the whole day and thought she drowned. By the time she got back, she wished she had. Her husband found her phone and read a bunch of messages supposedly from her aunt, but it was quickly clear from the sexy content it wasn't her aunt at all. She had been having an affair with the best man for apparently years. They got an annulment shortly after. $60,000 down the drain. One of the most opulent weddings I've ever been to. The wedding was at a state park that's famous for its giant gorge/waterfall. I don't know whose idea this was, but someone suggested a photo overlooking this gorge and everybody was game. The wedding party went around a stone security barrier and the maid of honor literally fell off the cliff to her death. It was like 500 plus feet. This didn't ruin the whole wedding, but it surely didn't brighten my day. After the ceremony we were standing in front of the altar and people took turns to congratulate us. As it was my mother's turn, she took my hand and told me she's sorry she raised such a bad person like me. Thank God my husband doesn't speak her language well. Was a guest of friend of the bride. Did not know anyone attending. Very expensive over-the-top place. Several hundred guests of this very Italian wedding. Maid of honor grabs mic at the cocktail hour, begins her speech. Rambling, drunk, quickly devolves to stating the recently deceased mother of the bride was against this wedding and that's basically what killed her. Plus Vinny will never give up prostitutes. She is tackled by several people and dragged away. The happy couple is separated and divorced within a year. I used to work at a pretty upscale catering hall in New Jersey back in college, and we had two instances where I witnessed a ruined wedding. The first story is simple, bride and best man caught out in the car, but the second story, we all thought it was weird when a couple of the groomsmen asked for, and got access to, the reception room during cocktail hour, for decorating, not something we normally saw the men do. In any case, we get through the courses just fine, and one thing becomes very clear to us staff. The bride side of the family is very conservative. They didn't drink, they barely danced, and they watched wide-eyed as the groom's side of the party went wild. Now it's time for the speeches! About halfway through his speech, the best man says something along the lines of, "Hey bride's family, I know you think your girl is so sweet and innocent and Christian, and they are the perfect couple, but if you want to see what they're really like, look under your seat!" Well, taped under every chair was a picture of the bride and groom caught in the act. The groom's family and friends roared with laughter, but the bride's side was pissed. There were so many fights that broke out that night. Did I mention this was in NJ? The wedding was pretty much over at that point. We attended a wedding for a family member who didn't have a lot of money. It was hosted at an inexpensive venue but was nice. My heart broke when only a third of the people invited showed up. You could see the hurt in the couple's face. They came up to our table and said, "Do you have any friends in city? We lived an hour away." They had all this food for 100 people but only 30 guests. They were willing to have complete strangers come down just so their money and food wouldn't go to waste. We hadn't handed over our card with cash inside yet, so my husband hit the ATM and added another $100. Hurricane Ivan. Our wedding was scheduled for Friday and the hurricane hit us dead center on Thursday. We were sitting around with no power on Friday and remembered that a neighbor was a pastor, so my partner and I just knocked on his front door and asked if he would just marry us in the front yard. So the big church wedding was cancelled, but instead I got married in the front yard with chainsaws and stuff in the background. Been married 17 years now. I worked on a tropical island of the coast of Queensland, Australia. Loads of weddings happen there. Most days there'd be one or two. One day this groom's party comes through my bar. They're on the Bucks party thing before the wedding the next day. They're pretty drunk at 4 p.m. I figured they started early and would finish early given they have a sunrise ceremony. Worst idea in the world. FYI. About an hour later they've left and gone to another bar on the island. Then the bride's party comes through. Equally shit-faced. I finished work at 9 p.m. then came back 3 hours later to work in the nightclub. I get in at midnight. Start pouring drinks. It's busy as fuck with like 250 people in the club. Around 1 a.m. the groom and bride parties roll in absolutely destroyed. They look disgustingly drunk. I've no idea why security let them in because I wasn't serving them. They left about 45 minutes later. So, roughly, they'd arrive back at their hotel rooms around 2 a.m. with the expectation that the bride and her party need to be up at 4 a.m. for hair and makeup to be done in time for a 7:15 a.m. ceremony. They all decide we'll just stay up all night and keep drinking until the wedding. At this stage they had to have been drinking for 15 to 18 hours. Anyway, ceremony time rolls around. She can't walk down the aisle, which is on the beach, in her heels, so she tosses them off. Groom and all their friends are drunk as fuck and can barely stand. They try to say their vows but the celebrant can't understand them, so she isn't legally allowed to marry them because they're too drunk to consent to marriage. Whole wedding is canned. A simple wedding, like the one they had, for the wedding party and 20 guests cost $35,000, so they wasted all that money to be told sorry, you're drunk, I cannot legally marry you. Aussie bride married into Russian family. There was vodka bottles on every table. The bride tried to keep up with the vodka shots. I was impressed at her effort. Then she disappeared for a couple of hours, and didn't move much for the rest of the night. A co-worker was at one of best friend's wedding. There were very specific rules about the food, no nuts. There were a couple people there, including the maid of honor, who were severely allergic. The venue served something that had nuts. Maid of honor went anaphylactic. EpiPen was not effective, and she died on the way to the hospital. Needless to say, there are lawsuits abound. Big wedding, around 500 people. All the future wife's doing. She wanted the huge, $70,000 wedding. I was a groomsman. Pre-wedding, he's nervous as hell. All these people, has to be perfect, this is her dream wedding, yada yada. So, at some point the whiskey gets pulled out. It went from a calm the nerves few shots, to he's just about finished the bottle. We give him water, get him in the shower, and redressed. It's go time. Midway through her vows, he pukes all down the front of her dress. It was horrible, but it was great. They're going on 8 years strong. Thanks for listening. Subscribe for more daily videos.